I always thought my life with Clara was a steady rhythm, like the hum of a well-tuned engine. We'd been married 12 years, and I'd built my world around her. Our little house in the suburbs, the garden she tended with such care, the way she'd hum old jazz tunes while cooking dinner. I'm James, a mechanic by trade, hands always stained with grease, but she never minded. She'd laugh and say it made me rugged, real. We didn't have kids, but we had each other, and that felt like enough. At least it did for me. It started with the phone calls. Late at night, she'd slip out of bed, whispering into the receiver in the kitchen. I'd hear the soft cadence of her voice, too low to make out words, and I'd tell myself it was her sister or a friend. Clara was a night owl, always had been. But then the calls got longer, and she started locking her phone, something she'd never done before. I'd catch her smiling at the screen during dinner, her eyes darting away when I asked who it was. Just work, she'd say. But she was a florist. What kind of flower emergency happens at midnight? The first real crack came on a Tuesday. I'd come home early from the shop, a rare slow day, and found her car gone. She wasn't at the shop. She told me she had the day off. I called her, but it went straight to voicemail. Hours later, she breezed in, cheeks flushed, hair slightly mussed, carrying a bag of groceries she claimed she'd just picked up. The receipt in the bag was from a store 30 miles away, time-stamped 2 hours earlier. Traffic, she said, brushing past me. I stood there, the receipt crumpled in my fist, feeling the hum of our life stutter for the first time. I didn't confront her. Not yet. I'm not a man who leaps before he looks. Instead, I watched. Her late-night calls turned into late-night errands. She'd leave with vague excuses, needing to drop off a friend, picking up something for the shop, and return with that same flush, that same distracted smile. I started checking the mileage on her car. 50 miles one night, 70 the next. Our town's not that big. The engine in my chest started to sputter, but I kept it running on fumes, telling myself I was wrong, that she'd never break us like that. Then came the jacket. It was hanging on the back of a kitchen chair one morning. A man's jacket. Leather, worn, not mine. She said it was her brother's, left behind from a visit. Her brother lives in Oregon. We're in Ohio. I held it up, the scent of cologne hitting me like a punch, sharp, unfamiliar, not the floral notes she loved. She snatched it away, laughing too loud, saying she'd mail it back. I didn't buy it, but I nodded, letting the lie sit between us like a loaded gun. The jacket stayed with me, a ghost in my mind. I couldn't shake the smell, the weight of it in my hands. Clara acted like nothing was wrong, twirling through our days with that same jazz hum. But I saw the cracks now, her glances at the clock, the way she'd linger by the window when I left for work. I started waking up before her, slipping out to the garage to think. The tools there were my sanctuary, cold steel I could trust. I'd tighten bolts, polish chrome, and wonder who was tightening their grip on my wife. I decided to follow her. It was a Thursday, one of those gray Ohio days that smothers the light. She said she was meeting a friend for coffee. I called in sick, parked my truck a block from home, and waited. Sure enough, she left at noon, dressed sharper than coffee with a friend required. Red lipstick, heels, a skirt I hadn't seen in years. My heart thudded as I trailed her, keeping my distance. She didn't go to the cafe. She drove 20 miles out of town, to a motel off the highway, the kind with flickering neon and peeling paint. I parked across the street, watching as she pulled into the lot. A man stepped out of a room, tall, broad, wearing that same leather jacket. My stomach twisted. He grinned at her, lazy and familiar, and she ran to him, throwing her arms around his neck. They disappeared inside, the door clicking shut like a hammer on my skull. I sat there for 2 hours, hands white on the steering wheel, the engine idling. When she came out, her hair was a mess again, her lipstick gone. She drove off, and I stayed, staring at the motel, the hum in my chest replaced by a roar. I didn't go home that night. I drove to the shop, slept on a cot in the back, and let the betrayal sink in. Clara wasn't just stepping out. She was stepping into someone else's life. The man wasn't a stranger. The way they moved together screamed history. I thought of her brother, the lie about the jacket, and started piecing it together. Her brother had a friend, Tony, a guy she dated before me. I'd met him once, years ago. Cocky, loud, always in leather. Could it be him? The thought burned, but I needed proof. The next day, I played dumb. Clara kissed me goodbye, all sweetness, and I smiled back, my mask in place. After she left, I tore through her things. In a shoebox under the bed, I found it. A stack of letters, handwritten, signed T. They were old, from before we met, but one was new, dated last month. "Can't wait to feel you again," it read. My hands shook as I folded it back, the roar in my chest growing louder. Tony. It had to be. Knowing his name didn't make it easier. Tony. The word stuck in my throat like rust on a wrench. I remembered him now. Dark hair, a smirk that begged to be wiped off, the kind of guy who thought the world owed him everything. Clara had mentioned him once, years back, a casual old flame she'd laughed off. I'd laughed too, trusting her. Now that trust was ash, and I was left sifting through it, trying to figure out how long she'd been tending his fire instead of ours. I couldn't confront her yet, not without a plan. I'm a mechanic. I fix things. I don't break them without knowing how they'll come apart. So I dug deeper. I tracked her phone using an app I'd installed months ago for safety. She'd been to that motel 6 times in 2 months. I cross-checked dates with Tony's social media, public posts about road trips, and reunions lined up too perfectly. He lived an hour away, close enough to slink into my life whenever he pleased. The letters hinted at more. A past she'd never let go, a present she'd hidden from me. I followed her again, this time prepared. She went to a diner instead of the motel, meeting Tony in a booth by the window. I watched from my truck, binoculars in hand, feeling like a stranger in my own story. They laughed, her hand on his arm, his fingers brushing hers. It wasn't just physical. It was intimate, a dance they'd perfected. I snapped photos, my hands steady despite the storm inside me. When she left, I stayed, watching Tony finish his coffee, oblivious to the lens on him. Back home, I studied the pictures, the letters, the mileage logs. It was a puzzle, and I'd solved it. Clara wasn't just betraying me. She was rewriting our marriage into a footnote. I thought of confronting her, of smashing the truth in her face, but that wasn't enough. She'd cry, lie, maybe even leave. No, I wanted her to feel what I felt, the slow grind of losing everything. And Tony? He'd pay too. I started sketching a plan, not on paper, but in my head, where it could simmer. That night, she curled up next to me on the couch, oblivious. "You're quiet," she said, her voice soft. I nodded, forcing a smile. "Just tired." She kissed my cheek, and I felt the weight of her lips like a blade. The roar in my chest was a promise now. I'd turn their little dance into a reckoning. I didn't sleep. I lay there, plotting, the hum of our old life gone for good. The plan took shape in the garage, surrounded by tools and the smell of oil. I'd always been good with my hands, building, breaking, making things right. Now I'd use that skill to unravel Clara and Tony's world. Revenge wasn't about yelling or throwing punches. It was about precision, about stripping away what they valued most. Clara loved her freedom, her charm, the way people adored her. Tony loved his swagger, his control. I'd take it all, piece by piece, and leave them with nothing but each other's wreckage. First, I needed leverage. I hired a guy, Rusty, an old friend who'd done some shady work before. He was discreet, a shadow with a camera. I gave him Tony's name, the motel, the diner. "Everything," I said. "I want everything." Rusty didn't ask questions. He just nodded and disappeared. While he worked, I kept up the act at home. Breakfast with Clara, small talk, even a laugh or two. She didn't suspect a thing, her lies as smooth as ever. It made me sick, but it fueled me too. Rusty came back a week later with a file thick as my fist. Photos, receipts, even audio from a bug he'd slipped into Tony's car. Clara's voice, low and playful, filled my headphones as I listened alone in the garage. "James doesn't know," she said. He's too busy with his wrenches. Tony laughed, promising her a weekend away. The file had more. Tony wasn't just with Clara. He had another woman, a blonde, plus a string of debts from gambling. Clara didn't know that part. I smiled for the first time in weeks. Weaknesses. Gears I could turn. I started small. Tony's truck, a beat-up Chevy he loved, broke down one night outside the diner. Funny how a little sugar in the gas tank can ruin an engine. He'd never trace it to me. I'd been home with Clara, watching a movie she picked. She didn't notice my gloves that night, or the faint smell of syrup on my shirt. The next day, she got a call, Tony, ranting about his truck. She was flustered, snapping at me over breakfast. I just shrugged, sipping my coffee, the roar in my chest purring now. Then I went after her garden. Clara's pride was her flowers. Roses, lilies, all tended like children. I waited for a night she was out running errands, then mixed a slow-acting herbicide into the soil. It'd take weeks to show, but when it did, her perfect little world would wilt. She'd blame the weather, the soil, never me. I watched her water them the next morning, humming her jazz, and felt the first taste of satisfaction. It wasn't enough, but it was a start. Rusty's file gave me more than I'd hoped. Tony wasn't just a cheat, he was a mess. Gambling debts piled up, owed to men who didn't mess around. I saw an opening. Using a burner phone, I tipped off one of his creditors, an ex-con named Vito I'd found through Rusty's contacts. Tony's got cash stashed, I said, giving them the motel room number. It was a lie, but they didn't care. 2 nights later, Tony got jumped outside the diner. Clara came home shaken, saying he'd been mugged. I nodded, feigning concern, while the roar inside me thrummed. Her garden started yellowing a week later. She fretted over it, calling it a mystery, digging into books for answers. I offered to help, playing the dutiful husband, knowing every petal she lost was a cut I'd made. She didn't suspect me. Why would she? I was James, the steady one, the man who fixed things. Meanwhile, Rusty kept tabs on Tony. His truck was gone, his debts were mounting, and the blonde was asking questions about late-night calls. Clara didn't know that part yet, but she would. I escalated. Tony's landlord got an anonymous tip about noise complaints and unpaid rent. Half true, thanks to Rusty's digging. Eviction papers followed. Clara started coming home distracted, her phone buzzing more than ever. I listened in one night, catching her whisper, "We'll figure it out, Tony. Just hold on." She thought I was asleep. I wasn't. The next day, I mailed the blonde a packet. Photos of Tony and Clara, timestamps included. No note, just evidence. Her reaction hit fast. Tony called Clara in a panic, their voices loud through the thin walls as I pretended to read in the living room. "She's gone," he said. "She took everything." Clara paced, promising to help, her jazz hum replaced by sharp, frantic tones. I turned a page, hiding my grin. Tony's life was crumbling, and Clara was tethering herself to the wreckage. My plan was a machine now, gears grinding smoothly, and I hadn't even touched her yet. Not really. That night, she cried in bed, thinking I didn't hear. I lay still, the roar in my chest a steady pulse. Her tears were just the beginning. I'd take her charm, her freedom, her everything, and when she had nothing left, I'd let her see the man she'd broken. Tony would be a shell by then, and she'd be the one holding the pieces. The engine was running hot now, and I was just getting started. Clara's tears became a nightly ritual, quiet sobs she thought I didn't hear. I'd lie there, eyes open in the dark, letting her grief fuel me. The garden was a graveyard now. Brown stalks and shriveled blooms she couldn't explain. She'd spend hours out there, digging, testing soil, her hands stained with dirt instead of flower pollen. I'd watch from the kitchen window, sipping coffee, offering useless suggestions. "Maybe it's the water," I'd say, knowing it was my herbicide eating away at her pride. She'd nod, distracted, her mind elsewhere. On Tony, I was sure. Rusty kept me updated. Tony's eviction had gone through. He was crashing at a buddy's place, a cramped apartment with peeling walls. The blonde had cleaned out his bank account before she left, and his creditors were circling like vultures. I'd planted that seed with Vito, and it was sprouting beautifully. Rusty got me photos. Tony, bruised and hollow-eyed, arguing with Clara in a parking lot. She looked frantic, clutching his arm. I studied her face in those shots, the woman I'd loved, and felt nothing but the steady churn of my plan. I turned up the heat. Clara's flower shop was her lifeline, a little boutique downtown where she charmed customers with her smile. I knew the owner, Mrs. Ellis, an old widow who liked me well enough. I dropped by one afternoon, casual as could be, with a sob story. Clara was stressed, I said. Forgetting things, losing focus. I hinted at debts, late nights, nothing concrete, just enough to plant doubt. Mrs. Ellis patted my hand, promising to keep an eye on her. The next week, Clara came home fuming. Mrs. Ellis had cut her hours, citing concerns. She blamed the slow season. I knew better. Tony's world kept crumbling. I'd found his gambling haunts online, seedy forums where he bragged about wins he never had. Using a fake account, I tipped off his bookies, exaggerated stories of cash he'd stashed, places he'd never been. They didn't care about proof. They cared about blood. Rusty told me Tony got roughed up again, this time bad enough to limp. Clara started leaving the house more. Helping a friend, she said. I didn't ask. I just checked her mileage, 40 miles round trip to that apartment. She was tethering herself to a sinking ship, and I was cutting the ropes. At home, I kept the mask on. I cooked dinner, fixed the leaky sink, played the husband she thought she still had. She'd smile, weaker each time, and I'd smile back, my mind spinning gears. The roar in my chest was a symphony now, every note a step closer to their ruin. I wasn't done with her shop yet, or with Tony's last threads of swagger. I had bigger moves in mind, ones that'd leave them both gasping. Clara's hours at the shop dwindled to nothing. Mrs. Ellis called her in one morning, and she came back red-eyed, clutching a severance check. "They're downsizing," she said, voice trembling. I hugged her, murmuring comfort, while inside I tallied the score. I'd slipped Mrs. Ellis a few more worries over coffee. Clara's forgetfulness, turning into missing cash from the register. It wasn't true, but the old woman's memory wasn't sharp, and my grease-stained hands made me believable. Clara was out, her charm useless, her lifeline severed. She started unraveling. The jazz hum was gone, replaced by pacing, muttering, phone calls she'd take in the bathroom with the water running. I'd stand outside, ear to the door, catching fragments. Tony's name, please for one more chance. She didn't know I'd mailed his creditors a burner phone photo of him and Clara at the diner, captioned, "He's spending your money on her." The next day, Rusty reported Tony's buddy kicked him out after a shouting match Vito's boys had paid a visit. Tony was sleeping in his broken truck now, parked in a Walmart lot. I hit her where it hurt next, her reputation. Clara thrived on being adored, the sweet florist everyone loved. I started small, chatting with neighbors about her late nights, her stress. I didn't lie outright, just dropped hints, let their imaginations fill in the blanks. Soon, the look started. Mrs. Carter across the street stopped waving. The mailman asked me if everything was okay at home. Clara noticed, her smile faltering when people passed her in the grocery store. She'd ask me if I'd heard anything, and I'd shrug, innocent as ever. Tony's turn came again. I'd kept a key piece from Rusty's file, Tony's old boss, a construction foreman who'd fired him for stealing tools. I sent the man a package, photos of Tony with Clara, timestamps matching days he'd called in sick, plus a note. "He's still laughing at you." The foreman was a prideful guy. Rusty said he tracked Tony down at that Walmart lot, left him with a busted lip and a warning. Clara came home that night with a bruise on her arm. She tried to pull Tony away, she said, from some drunk. I nodded, hiding the thrill in my gut. She was breaking now, her world shrinking. No job, no garden, no neighbors' smiles. Just Tony, a lifeline fraying faster than she could mend. I watched her sit at the kitchen table, staring at nothing, and felt the engine roar. I wasn't done. I had one more card for Tony, and Clara's final fall was coming. I'd make sure they saw each other at their worst before I showed my hand. Tony's truck was his last shred of pride, even broken. I fixed that. Late one night, I drove to the Walmart lot, hood up, gloves on, a crowbar through the windshield, tires slashed, seats torn open. It took 10 minutes. I left a note under the wiper, scrawled in block letters, "Pay up." His creditors would get the blame, and he'd have nowhere to hide. Rusty texted me the next day. Tony was a wreck, ranting to Clara on a payphone about those animals. She came home pale, saying she'd been visiting a friend. The bruise on her arm was darker now. Clara's isolation grew. I'd fed the neighborhood enough whispers that invitations stopped. Barbecues, book clubs, all the little threads that held her together. She'd stand by the window watching people pass, her face tight. I'd ask what was wrong, and she'd snap, "Nothing," before locking herself in the bedroom. Her phone buzzed less. Tony's number was all I saw on the bill now, calls stretching late into the night. I let her think she had that secret, let her cling to it. I went bigger with Tony. His gambling debts weren't enough. I wanted his name ruined. Rusty dug up an old arrest, bar fight, dropped charges, and I sent it to his construction buddies. Anonymous, with a twist. "He's bragging about dodging you." Word spread fast. By week's end, Rusty said Tony couldn't get day labor. Nobody trusted him. Clara started selling things, her jewelry, a lamp, telling me it was decluttering. I knew it was for him, and I let her, watching her pride bleed out with every pawnshop trip. Her breaking point came at the grocery store. Mrs. Carter, the neighbor, cornered her by the canned goods, voice loud enough for me to hear from the next aisle. "We all know what's going on, Clara. Poor James deserves better." Clara froze, then fled, leaving the cart. She didn't speak the whole drive home, just stared out the window, hands trembling. That night, she called Tony, sobbing, "They hate me." I listened from the hall, the roar in my chest a steady drum. I tightened the screws. Tony's truck was towed. Unpaid tickets I'd reported, and Clara's last sale, her mother's ring, barely covered his bail from a vagrancy charge. She was hollow now, a shell of the woman I'd married, tethered to a man who had nothing left. I waited, patient, the engine humming. The final act was close, and it'd be crueler than anything yet. Clara stopped leaving the house. She'd sit by the dead garden, staring at the ruin, or pace the kitchen, muttering about fixing things. Her phone was her lifeline. Tony's voice the only sound she chased. I'd hear her whisper promises. Money, a plan, a future. While I polished tools in the garage, plotting their endgame. She didn't notice the new locks on my toolbox, the burner phone I kept hidden, the way I watched her every move. She thought I was still the oblivious husband, and I let her. Tony was a ghost now, no truck, no job, no friends. Rusty said he'd been spotted begging outside a gas station. Leather jacket torn, face gaunt. I'd stripped him bare, but it wasn't enough. I wanted him to feel trapped, cornered, with Clara as his only anchor, and then I'd take her too. I sent Vito one last tip. He's hiding at her place. It was a lie, but they'd come looking, and Clara's fragile world would crack under the weight. They showed up on a Friday. 2 men in a black sedan, pounding on our door while I was at work. I parked down the street, watching. Clara answered, panicked, stammering denials. They didn't care. Pushed past her, tore through the house, left with nothing but threats. She called me after, voice shaking, saying some creeps had come about a debt. I rushed home, played the concerned husband, held her while she cried. Inside, I grinned. The neighbors saw it all, more whispers, more isolation. Her charm was gone. The florist who'd lit up rooms was a pariah now, avoided by everyone. I fed the fire, told the mailman she'd been mixed up with bad people. Let Mrs. Carter overhear me worrying about her. Clara's phone stopped ringing except for Tony, and even those calls grew shorter, sharper. I listened one night as he snapped, "You're useless now." She begged him to stay, promised more she couldn't give. I turned away, the roar in my chest a wildfire. I set the final trap. Tony's desperation was my lever. I mailed him a forged letter from Clara, her handwriting mimicked from old notes. "Meet me at the motel. I've got cash. Last chance." He'd go, I knew it. Clara got a text from my burner, pretending to be Tony. "Motel. Tonight. Bring everything." She'd go too. I waited, patient, the engine at full throttle. They'd find each other, empty-handed, and I'd be there to turn the key. The motel was the stage and I was the director. I got there early, parked out of sight, watching the neon flicker against the dusk. Tony arrived first, limping from his truckless life, eyes darting like a cornered animal. Clara pulled in 10 minutes later, her car rattling. She'd sold the good tires. She stepped out, clutching a bag I knew was empty, her face tight with hope and fear. They met by the door, and I leaned forward, binoculars steady, the roar in my chest a crescendo. It unraveled fast. Tony grabbed her arm, demanding the cash. She yanked back, shouting he'd promised her a way out. "You lied!" she screamed, voice cracking. He shoved her, snarling she'd dragged him down. She slapped him, and he froze, then laughed. A hollow, bitter sound. They didn't notice me slip from the truck, camera in hand, snapping every second. The photos would be my final gear, but I wasn't done yet. I called Vito's boys, timing it perfect. The black sedan rolled in as Clara and Tony tore into each other. Two men stepped out, bats in hand, and Tony bolted, leaving Clara to face them. She screamed, stumbling back, but they weren't there for her. Just the show. They smashed her car windows, slashed the tires, left her sobbing in the dirt. I caught it all, the lens cold against my eye, her cries blending with the engine's hum in my mind. She limped home hours later, filthy, broken, saying she'd been robbed. I held her, murmuring nonsense, while she shook against me. The next day, I printed the photos. Clara slapping Tony, Tony abandoning her, her car wrecked. I mailed them. One set to Tony's last known address, one to her sister in Oregon, one to Mrs. Ellis. No note, just proof. Clara's phone buzzed that night, her sister, furious, cutting ties. Tony called too, cursing her name, blaming her for everything. She sat at the kitchen table, staring at the dead garden through the window, a ghost in our house. I stood behind her, hands clean of grease for once, and felt the engine quiet. She had nothing left. No job, no friends, no Tony, no family. He was a beggar now, and she was his shadow. I'd taken it all, slow and sure, and tomorrow, I'd show her the wrench that turned it. The roar was a whisper now, satisfied. Clara barely moved the next day. She sat in the living room, wrapped in a blanket, staring at the wall where her flower sketches used to hang. I'd taken them down weeks ago, claiming they needed cleaning. Her phone was silent now, the last call from Tony a venomous goodbye. I watched her from the kitchen, flipping through my photos like a mechanic inspecting a finished engine. The pieces were in place, the gears aligned. Today, I'd show her the hands that turned them. I started subtle. "You look tired," I said, setting a cup of tea in front of her. She nodded, barely glancing up. I sat across from her, casual, and slid the first photo across the table, her and Tony at the diner, laughing. Her eyes widened, hands trembling as she touched the edge. "Where'd you get this?" she whispered. I didn't answer, just added another, her running to him at the motel, his arms open. Her breath hitched and I kept going, a slow reveal. The letters, the mileage logs, the audio transcript from Rusty's bug. She tried to speak, but I cut her off, voice calm as steel. "I know everything, Clara. Every mile, every lie, every minute you spent with him." Her face crumpled, tears welling, but I wasn't done. I laid out the motel fight photos, her slapping Tony, him shoving her, the wrecked car. "You thought I was blind," I said, "but I saw it all, and I fixed it." She stared, mouth open, as I stood, towering over her. "You're not the only one who can play a game." The confession came fast, a flood of sobs and excuses. "Tony was a mistake," she said, "a pull from the past." She swore it was over, begged me to forgive her, hands clutching my shirt. I let her talk, let her think there was a chance, while the roar in my chest purred. Then I pulled away, dropping the last photo, her sister's letter, forwarded to me, disowning her. "You've got nothing left," I said, and walked out, leaving her crumpled on the floor. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the garage, tools gleaming under the light, listening to her pace the house. She'd try to fix it, I knew, call someone, anyone. But her bridges were ash. I'd burned them all. Tomorrow I'd finish Tony, and then I'd walk away from her for good. The engine was still running, one last gear to turn. Tony was next. I found him at the gas station, slumped against a wall, a cardboard sign at his feet. Anything helps. His leather jacket was gone, traded for a stained hoodie. I parked across the street, watching him beg, the swagger I'd hated reduced to dust. Rusty had confirmed it. Tony was broke, alone, a pariah even among the desperate. I'd taken his life apart, but he didn't know the mechanic behind it. Today he would. I stepped out, hood up, carrying a manila envelope. He didn't recognize me at first, not until I dropped the envelope in his lap and said, "From Clara." His eyes flicked up, bloodshot, confused. Inside were the photos, every moment I'd captured, plus a note I'd forged in her hand. "You ruined me. Enjoy the fall." He tore through them, hands shaking, muttering her name like a curse. Crouched, voice low. "She's done with you, Tony. And I'm done with her." Recognition hit him then. "James?" he rasped, scrambling back. I nodded, letting him see the steel in my eyes. "You thought you could take what's mine and walk away. Look at you now." I stood, tossing $1 at his feet, his last insult. "That's all you're worth." He lunged, weak and slow, but I stepped aside, watching him fall. People stared, whispering, and I left him there, a broken cog in my machine. Clara was waiting when I got home, eyes red, voice hoarse. "What did you do to him?" she demanded. I shrugged, dropping the mask entirely. "What you did to me," I said. "Took everything." She screamed then, a raw, animal sound, lunging at me with fists I barely felt. I caught her wrists, held her still, and whispered, "You chose this." She collapsed, sobbing, and I walked away, the roar in my chest a steady hum now. That night I packed a bag. Not much, just clothes, tools, a few photos from before her betrayal. Clara watched from the doorway, silent, a ghost in her own house. I didn't look back. The engine was winding down, but one last twist remained. Something crueler than anything yet. I didn't leave town right away. I rented a room across the city, a cheap place with thin walls, and waited. Clara would think I'd gone for good, and Tony would fester in his ruin. But I'd left a trail, a breadcrumb they'd follow to their final fall. In the house, tucked in her dead garden, I'd buried a box. Inside were duplicates of the photos, the letters, and a fake deed. Our home, sold to a non-existent buyer, dated yesterday. She'd find it eventually and panic. Took 3 days. Rusty called, saying Clara had been seen digging in the yard, frantic, pulling up the box. She'd called a lawyer, voice shaking, only to learn the deed was worthless. No sale, no loss, just a phantom to haunt her. But the photos reignited her desperation. She tracked Tony down, Rusty said, dragging him back to the house, screaming about fixing it. I pictured them there, clawing at each other, trapped in the wreckage I'd built. I wasn't done. I kept one last lever, Tony's old gambling forums. Using my fake account, I posted the photos, tagged his aliases, and spun a tale. Tony and his girl scammed me out of thousands. The replies came fast. Angry debtors, old enemies, all hunting him again. Rusty said Vito's boys were back on his trail, and Clara's too, thinking she was in on it. They'd never find cash, but they'd find each other, and that was enough. Clara's neighbors sealed her fate. The whispers I'd planted bloomed. Police got calls about shady people at our house. Cops showed up, found Tony squatting there with Clara, both wild-eyed and shouting. They were hauled off, trespassing for him, disturbing the peace for her. I watched from a distance, parked in my truck, as she screamed my name into the night. The engine purred, satisfied. I drove away then, leaving Ohio behind. The house was hers, technically, but it was a tomb now, empty, hated, a mirror of her choices. Tony would rot on the streets, and she'd rot with him, tied by the lies they'd spun. I'd taken everything slow and sure, and now I was free. Weeks later, I settled in a new town, a quiet place in Kentucky with a garage that needed a mechanic. I changed my name. Jim now, not James. Shedding the past like old skin. The tools were the same, though, and the work kept my hands busy, my mind clear. The roar was gone, replaced by a steady hum, a rhythm I could live with. I didn't check on Clara or Tony. Didn't need to. Rusty's last update, unasked for, said they'd split. Her in a halfway house, him drifting. Good enough. I thought about her sometimes, the woman she'd been. Humming jazz, tending flowers, laughing at my greasy hands. That Clara was a memory, buried under the one who'd chosen Tony, who'd rewritten our life into a lie. I didn't hate her anymore. I didn't feel much at all. The revenge had burned that out, a fire that left nothing but ash. Tony, though, he'd been the spark, and I'd made sure he'd never light anything again. The box in the garden was my favorite touch. She'd never know it was fake, never stop wondering when the buyer would come. It'd gnaw at her, a ghost I'd left behind. The neighbors would talk too. Mrs. Carter had seen the cops, spread the tale of that woman and her thug. Clara's charm was a myth now, and Tony's swagger was a joke. I dismantled them, piece by piece, and walked away clean. Sometimes, I'd catch myself smiling at the irony. She'd wanted freedom with him, and I'd given it to her. Freedom to fall, to lose, to see what betrayal cost. I'd fixed it like I fixed engines, with precision and patience. No one suspected me. No one cared enough to look. The new town knew Jim the mechanic, not James the husband, and that was fine. Nights were quiet now. I'd sit on my porch, a beer in hand, watching the stars. The hum in my chest was steady, a machine at rest. I'd won, not by shouting or breaking, but by building their ruin from the ground up. It was enough. Months passed, and the past faded like a bad dream. I'd built a life in Kentucky. Steady work, a few nods from locals, a routine that fit. The garage was mine now, bought cheap from an old man retiring, and I'd painted it red, a color Clara hated. Felt right. I didn't think about her much, but when I did, it was with a mechanic's eye, analyzing the breakdown, not mourning it. She'd been a faulty part, and I'd replaced her. Rusty called one day out of the blue. "Thought you'd want to know," he said. Clara had left the halfway house, vanished into some nowhere town. Tony was in jail, petty theft, caught stealing from a gas station. "They're done," Rusty added, and I heard the grin in his voice. I thanked him, hung up, and went back to tightening a bolt. Done. That's all they were now. A job finished, a machine scrapped. I found the last photo by accident, tucked in my toolbox. Clara and Tony at the motel, her hand on his chest, his smirk wide. I stared at it, then lit a match, watched it curl and blacken. The smoke stung my eyes, but I didn't blink. It was the last piece, the final gear, and I let it go. The hum in my chest didn't falter, steady, strong, mine alone. The town had a fair that spring, and I went, blending into the crowd. A woman smiled at me, a florist selling lilies, and I nodded back, no sting in the memory. She wasn't Clara. I wasn't that James. I bought a flower, left it on a bench, and walked away. It wasn't forgiveness, it was closure, a bolt tightened one last time. I drove home under a wide sky, the engine of my truck purring, the tools in the back rattling soft. The revenge was a shadow now, a story I'd tell myself on quiet nights, marveling at the precision. Clara and Tony had their dance, their betrayal, and I turned it into a machine of my own. A cruel, beautiful thing that ran its course and stopped. I was free not because they were gone, but because I'd made them nothing. The hum was all I needed, and it carried me forward.